Welcome to how to use the Ansible.config file in Ansible Network Automation. In this video, we're going to talk about what the Ansible.config file is and what the main purpose of it is. We're going to talk about how you can have multiple Ansible.config files and how Ansible knows which one of those files to use. And then we're going to look at what's in the Ansible.config file and what we need to know about what to change in the Ansible.config file for network automation. Just speaking very generally, the purpose of the Ansible.config file is to define a whole bunch of settings. There's a lot of stuff that you can do in there about variables and parameters. But for the main purposes of network automation, the main thing we need to focus on is defining defaults. All right, so the first thing to note is that we can have multiple Ansible.config files. Basically, each directory can have its own Ansible.config file. And the reason that you would want to do this is if you have multiple automation projects with different groups of devices and you want to have different settings for each of the groups, then you can have different directories with different Ansible.config files. So how does Ansible know which one to use? Well, it's based off the directory that you're in. If you execute a Ansible ad hoc command or playbook, it's first going to look at the directory that you execute it from. And if there's nothing in that folder, then it's going to look at the default Ansible.config file. And I've got the default location there. It's in the etc.ansible directory, and the path to the file is also there as well. So what is in the Ansible.config file? I'm just going to quickly take us to the CLI and take a look at it. All right, so I've fired up GNS3 and I'm on the CLI of the network automation device, which happens to be a Linux machine. And the next thing I'm going to do is change my directory to where the default Ansible.config file is. And then I'm going to use the more command to look at what's in there. And now I'm just going to scroll through it. But as you can see in the lower left-hand corner, we're only looking at 3% of what's in there. And the Ansible.config file actually has a lot of text and explanation of what you can do in there. So if you're interested, you can just pull it up and look at the file that's in there. And what's in there is dependent on the version of Ansible that you're using. And so depending on what version you're using, it can be different than what you're looking at here. All right, so as you can see, it's a very large folder. And then just real quick, I'm going to back out. All right, and then I'm going to hit LS real quick. Now we can see that we have a routers directory and a switches directory. So obviously, if I had separate automation projects, one for routers and one for switches, and I wanted to have a separate Ansible.config file for each, in order to run automation on the routers, I would first have to go to that directory, like that, and then Ansible would be using the Ansible.config file there, or for the switches. And then if we didn't have one in those specific folders, it would look to the default one in the etc.ansible config directory. All right, so back to the slides. So as I mentioned earlier, the main thing for network automation that we need to focus on is the defaults. And if you're just working on a lab setting, the only thing that you really need to configure correctly in order to get it all working is the inventory. And there's a couple different ways to configure the inventory, and I'm going to do another video on that. And then the rest of these settings are common for network-based deployments. So that gathering parameter basically limits the fact gathering. Because in network deployments, most of the modules are going to run on the control device itself. It's basically just going to be gathering facts about the Linux server, which is useless to us, so it's very common to turn that off. The retry files enabled means that it's going to generate a list of failed nodes when a playbook runs, and generally you don't want that. The timeout setting is the SSH timeout, and that's in seconds. And then the host checking equal to false basically turns off this check if it's the first time that you're SSHing to a device and it's not familiar with it. It asks you if you want to do that. In a production setting, you may want to, but in a lab, I usually turn that off. All right, that concludes this video. If you found it helpful, please consider giving a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.